Good evening, Justin.
Hi. Hi, Nsiki. How are you?
How, I'm good, thank you. How are you?
I'm good.
How are you feeling? How are the nerves?
They're pretty chill. But I do agree. We could talk too much. So uh, yeah, it could go on. I could talk about this for hours.
Yes, because it's a passion of yours, right?
It is. Yeah, it is. It is, and then it has it has so many different directions that it can go, and there's so many different people that are involved in it. So I think it's a really cool project in so many different ways. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. Okay, we're going to get started. We're just going to jump right in, and people can join us and ask questions as they go. I see Bones is here. Hi, Bones. So yeah, we're gonna get started. So Justin, for people who have never met you, tell us a little bit about yourself, and I mean the fact that you're a trained scientist. Before we get into everything that you've been doing.
Yeah, so I did a PhD in cell biology, and when I was doing it, I kind of realized at this point, like, either it's ADD or just kind of like an interest in lots of different things that I have. But during my PhD, I did some science journalism at one point, and then I ended up kind of deciding that academic science really wasn't for me, because I felt like it was too far removed from the issues of the world, and you could kind of get too stuck into, like, a phosphate bond on a specific amino acid. And for some people that's great, and they dig into problems, and they work on problems like their entire lives. And I think that's incredibly commendable. And in some ways, like, to carry on in science is in some ways safer than getting off of that track. But for me, I got really interested in sort of like how ideas spread, and what stops ideas from going, to sort of going, like for example, like an Indian farmer develops a insecticide spraying machine on the back of his motorcycle, and he does that for his own self. But then how do you get some idea like that some bright person has developed, and spread it across communities or across the country? So anyway, so I ended up doing a bit of work around that, and I went to Bangladesh, and I went to India, and I met people that were involved in kind of grassroots innovation. And then I ended up coming to South Africa, working for an organization that was trying to do grassroots innovation within the healthcare sector, and specifically within HIV clinics when antiretrovirals were rolling out. So the whole idea was, again, a nurse comes up with an idea to get more people on treatment, or to take advantage of the time, or to make care better, or all of these different sorts of things that can work within a clinic, but how do you spread them beyond that? So anyway, so I did that, and then I ended up working in healthcare more broadly, and I worked with the Vitz Reproductive Health Institute, and the Clinton Health Access Initiative, and eventually ended up working with the National Department of Health, doing kind of national rollout of programs and health stuff, and the HPV vaccine rollout in South Africa. And anyway, so I sort of felt like, what's great about medicine, for the most part, is there a pill, or it's a device, and you can give it to people, and it helps them. It's that kind of magic of ARVs, right? Even when people default on them a little bit, they are still these kind of miracle interventions. And yet, like, when you kind of dig into what's happening within the education system, there's so many young people that we're not quite getting the education, I think, that we all want them to get. So I kind of, again, hopping around a bit, I then decided, well, what I really am interested in is I really love science from the perspective of how you can see the world through the lens of science, and you can, kind of like, you can know how plants work, and you can look at some random bird, and maybe you've taken a class in comparative zoology or something, and you know how it's different from mammals, and it's just like that kind of like amazement and wonder of nature and science. And so I kind of wanted to bring some of that to other people. And so then I started CodeMakers in 2015. And the idea with that was to kind of, around the world, were doing a lot more hands-on education and makerspace kind of stuff, and coding, robotics. So I started CodeMakers to bring coding into low-income schools and do cardboard engineering and robotics and stuff like that. And so we did a lot of that. And I could talk about that also for hours, but then a couple of years ago, we started SuperScientists as a way of trying to connect with kids in a different way around science and scientists. That's a long answer.
Before we get into SuperScientists, let's just backtrack a little bit and speak a little bit about CodeMakers, right? So you said you're introducing it for children in schools to learn about coding, and obviously you work in very different communities. Since 2015 till now, it's about, give or take, 6 years, right? How has CodeMakers, if it has, changed how the community is viewing science?
I think the thing that, one of the things that we did as CodeMakers was we translated the coding education Scratch, which is free coding education software used by millions of people around the world. It was developed at MIT in the US, like premier engineering university in the US. And we translated it to isiZulu. And so like that, I feel like is one of our biggest accomplishments, even though it doesn't necessarily have a direct impact on the immediate community that I was working with, because I think, and that's kind of one of the things that I learned in working with at kind of national level programs. There's those sorts of programs that have an immediate impact on a small group of people, and then there are those sorts of things that you kind of let free to the world and can have a much bigger impact, but you don't get to necessarily see them. So I think one of the things that my approach, or maybe just kind of the way that coding education was when I first started doing this, was that it was seen by a lot of schools as like a nice to have, and not necessarily an integral part of how we need to think about education. And that's changed, and that's great. But to answer your question directly, for the young people that I worked with, like for some of them, it became the idea of like a place where kids could come together and they could hang out and they could make stuff and they could learn some new things, but also be very creative. And I think that was one of the really most important parts of what we did, and really what I love about Scratch and kind of like creative coding approach. Like it became like a community for them, and we facilitated that, but really it was more about, again, kind of unlocking the potential and unlocking the fact that I think young people, they have all these ideas and they are clever and switched on in ways that often I think the education system doesn't really appreciate, and so giving them that and say, because I think unfortunately too often teachers expect young people to learn what they say and give it back to them, rather than synthesize and critique and give their own understanding of things. So I think that was really freeing for a lot of the kids that we worked with. And we tried to do things, we had a art exhibit one year where we brought kids into a local gallery in Durban, and it was this awesome, like, well curated thing, and they'd made projects where they had they'd done some art classes, and then we taught them a bit of Photoshop, and then they took those different, and it was all within the context of like telling a story. And then they took these different pieces and they brought them into the software, and then they made animations with them. And we had an art exhibit then that had their kind of analog art and their digital art, and it was amazing. It was so cool. And they came into the gallery and like their jaws were on the floor. And then we tried to bring
approach to education, isn't it? No, I'm just saying that it's such a beautiful approach to education, because one thing that is holding back many countries is the fact that they want to stick to traditional education, which doesn't work anymore, really. You know, it's a matter of now working with who you have and seeing what the kids can do, because they can do so much, you know, and harnessing those skills to grow the country, right? But you can go on if I let you. Let's just move on just a little bit. Oh, okay. We'll get to questions a bit later. But I just want to talk about your latest project, you know.
Sure.
Yeah, it's kind of famous. It's trending. That's the word. It's trending at the moment.
I hope so. That'd be cool.
It's such a new concept. It's such a fascinating concept, besides just being new, you know. Super scientists. Why did you start it? Why did you feel it was important?
Sure. So, I mean, one of the reasons I started it was I think a lot of science, like when I was doing science and you're working with, you know, clear liquids and you're spinning them around and your cells die or they get contaminated or whatever, like at the end, even though that happens, what you're doing is just amazing, right? And the ability of scientists to cut DNA and make things glow with GFP, or to, you know, look at cells under the microscope and make movies of them interacting, and you know, you could just go on and on and on in whatever field that it is, whether it's astronomy and looking back in time with telescopes, or, you know, the sorts of work that physicists do. It's just like astounding what scientists can actually do. And of course, it's all like technologies and techniques and things, but those are this accumulated knowledge and skills that you can go from almost like never having done science to, within a very short period of time, being able to do these things. And it's amazing. So there is that aspect that I wanted to bring. And again, it's kind of like the wonderment of science. And then, you know, one of the things that we were doing as CodeMakers is I wanted kids to get more engaged in science. And we made a couple of videos. We did a couple of video interviews of young scientists that were great. But they're, you know, they cost money to make, and these sorts of things. So we ended up like putting up a bulletin board of scientists. I found people on the internet, and I printed out stuff, and I laminated their pictures, and I put them up, and nobody paid any attention to it whatsoever. They even stole they took the like push pens out of the board to make their shoes tap when they walk down the hallway. So it was just like, this is not working. And then at some point, like Pick and Pay was doing this animal card game thing. And it was just like, you know, kids were going mad for this stuff. So I just kind of, it was like those sorts of things. And then kids also, I realized like so many of the kids that we were working with, they were making superhero animations and drawing superheroes and these sorts of things. So it's just kind of like a combination of different things. Essentially, like, how do we get young people more engaged in science? How do we get them to see scientists that look like them, show off how cool science really is, and get them like into their hands, so that it's not just, something that you see in a poster and whatnot. And of course now we make posters, but this idea of, here's like, here I'm, like here is a scientist, right? I'll bring up Bones because I think she's there. But like, here's Bones, and I can read about her, and I can see, oh, she's from Wits University, and these are her heroes, and she has this advice for me, and this is what she does, and she's a real person, and it's just something that, maybe it doesn't hang around for so long, or I've been to kids' houses and they've like stuck them up on their closets. So it's kind of like, it's kind of ephemeral, but it can also be something that you can play with, you can trade. And yeah, I mean, and at some point I had this idea, and I sat on it. I didn't do anything with it. And then I randomly told this person, and she was like, oh, that sounds like a good idea. And so then I mocked something up with a friend of mine who was an artist, and then I found scientists that were willing to be the guinea pigs, and we launched it, and it was awesome. So, and it's only classic strength to strength. So
amazing. So what qualifies a scientist to be a super scientist?
I think, our approach to this is that it doesn't have to be somebody who's, at the top of the pyramid, because those people young people can't relate to them as much. They can't relate to young people. And also, it's, anyway, what I want, instead of telling you the negative, I'll tell you the positive, like what we want. We want people that can engage with young people, that are young, that are in a different fields, that care about science communication, that want to be part of a process, that and be part of essentially this kind of growing group of dynamic South Africans and not South Africans only, but scientists increasingly across the world. We're doing some scientists from the USA soon, but we want people that kind of see that they have this role and want to participate in it in some ways. Because I think one of the things that we've learned in this in doing this is that the scientists end up being like these great ambassadors for the project, but they also they're also already going out and maybe sharing what they're doing. They're giving talks at schools. They're doing these sorts of things, like when we can go to schools and whatnot. And so how can we, through this project, provide materials and support and other sorts of things that help them and boost the people? Because I think essentially what we are is we're this kind of bridge between the scientists that are already doing their thing and increasingly, like, so many people are doing stuff on social media and whatnot. But I think one of the things that's part of our success is that we're taking things off of social media and we're turning it into something that can get out to a young person and kind of rise above the fray a bit, because they are these characters and because kids can engage with them and stuff like that.
And then with the scientists, do you approach them or can they approach you?
We have done both. We used to have a nominate a scientist page on our website, but there were too many people that either were nominated by colleagues or family or friends or themselves. And then it was just like, we can't really, we don't have the capacity. And then the other thing, just from in sort of thinking about this as an educational tool, we want to have scientists from lots of different fields, right? So so, you know, like Kenilwe, for example, you know, I'd seen what she was doing on social media, and just thought, you know, like, this is so cool, like the work she, you know, work she's doing with Lee Berger and kind of exploration side of things and stuff. And Kim Tommy, who's Morpho, she's Morpho. She had like really liked the project. So, you know, I contacted them and said, hey, you know, would you guys like to be super scientists? And then who would you recommend? Because what we like to do is we like to do a group, and then we want to have, you know, half women, half men. And then they recommended the other the geologists that we did in this group. So yeah, exactly. So I mean, like, you know, I think we've done marine scientists, and we've done some astronomers, and a bunch of biologists, and paleoscientists now. And, you know, there's clearly other fields that we haven't even scratched the surface on. Yeah, so,
there's a lot.
And yeah, and other countries too, because I think, you know, every time we launch a scientist that's from a different country, then we have a lot of interest from that country. And I think, you know, kind of fundamentally, this is an idea. It's just a really good idea, and it's an idea that's very positive. I think that's one of the aspects of it that's you know, like, the scientists like it, kids like it, the universities like it, because it shines a light on the people that work for them. And it just kind of, it has this positive ripple effect where the more people we do, the more people that want to be profiled, and then that helps us from a content perspective to then have more things that we can use to reach more young people.
Sounds good. Sounds good. I know, obviously, I mean, Super Scientist is still in its infancy at this stage. But when you look at it, do you think it could ever become maybe a comic book, where the characters are actually talking to each other, or like a TV show or something like that?
Yeah, so we have a really good story arc for a comic. And Clyde Beach, who is you know, we've used a number of different really phenomenal artists. Curtis Bonham was the first one, and then Hero in My Hood made our activity book, which is just an awesome, you know, like, I can't even tell, but just like a, you know, beautiful, fun, colorful activity book. And then Clyde has made our most recent Super Scientist, and he's one of the artists that's part of the Quasi comic. So he has a lot of experience in making comics, and we are going to make I keep on saying we're going to, because it's just like, you know, it's not when we, you know, it's like when we make the comic. We're making a paleo comic, and then hopefully it will have other sorts of episodes later on, so we can do like a marine science one or something else. And then, yeah, I mean, I think that I think you could absolutely see this as a TV show, or as, you know, YouTube animation, and mixing the different bits. I think there's a ton of potential. And I mean, one of the things that I'm really keen for is developing like teacher resources, so that it can integrate, and it can, I mean, I think there's value in having things that are not part of school, but then there's also, you know, bringing it into school and making it exciting and making science, and, you know, connecting kids to, I think that's one of the big things that we want to do, right? We want to connect kids to the people, because kids are so socially minded, and they're so focused on, you know, who's doing what. So the more that we can bring scientists into the curriculum, super scientists in the curriculum, I think the better.
Yeah, that's great. That's great. So obviously at this point would consider you an expert in studying organizations of such sort.
No, I'm not.
Well, you have more experience than most, right? You have more experience maybe than me or somebody else who might be watching. So before we get to maybe the advice that you might share with them, what challenges have you experienced with either code makers or super scientists?
Um, Innumerable. I think, I think, you know, some of the big ones were with code makers. I think like it's easy, or I don't know if it's what we didn't do is we didn't sort of like set ourselves up for success. And I think like we really wanted to go and work in schools that were you know, low income schools where this was kind of brand new, and sort of back when we started doing this, there weren't many people doing coding education. But I feel like we kind of tried in some of the harder environments than necessarily, you know, in environments that would allow us to succeed and then could allow us to grow and could allow us to bring in funds and then go from there. So that's, I mean, I think that's one thing. It's just setting yourself up for success. And you know, knowing that there might be other places that you want to go, but maybe not going to those places first. And then the other thing is, you know, I recognize that there's some things that I'm good at and there's some things that I'm not. And I feel like I've always been pretty good with ideas and, you know, kind of thinking about things in a different way. But like grant writing is something that I never prioritize. So I almost always kind of like, I'm like, I'll make this thing because if I make it, then people will see how cool it is. And then they will, you know, then I mean, and there's an aspect around that, right? I think like you have to establish yourself and you have to prove yourself. And there's so many organizations that I think people are like, you know, oh, you've only been around for 6 months. Like, you know, oh, like you've only been around for a year. I think there is an aspect where when people see that you've stuck it out for a long time, that it gives you some real credibility. But the point is that, you know, I think it is difficult, and it's difficult in South Africa in that there's just not, you know, there's just not as much funding as I think one would hope there is. So yeah. But I do think, you know, finding the team of people and recognizing what you're good at and not good at, and then you know, find that grant writer or find that person who's good at, you know, the kind of COO person or what have you. So I think, you know, I'm hoping that we're kind of at the point where we can bring in funding and we can, and kind of get over that hump, because you're always, I think, in that initial hump where, or that point where like one person can only do so much, but until you can get to the point where you bring in enough funds, then you can't ever hire people. So anyway, I think I could go on about
it. It's a catch. Yeah. I get you.
It is a bit of a catch-22.
Yeah.
Or at least that's been for me. I mean, your mileage may vary. You know, I think it can be a very independent. It can be very different. But that's been just my experience.
Okay, thank you, Justin. Let's quickly answer a question because it has been 30 minutes, believe it or not. So let's quickly answer a question. So Ginelli asks, Justin, what do you think the future of SciComm is going to look like? I will admit I panicked during the last Instagram shutdown.
I don't know. I mean, like, you know, like I feel like, you know, if you're not on TikTok, if you're not on all of these different platforms, like there's this aspect around which, I I think I think the thing about science communication, like for the audience that we want to work with, is how do you actually access them? Because so many kids, they don't have phones, and they don't have free flowing internet, and there's an aspect where keeping everything within the social media bubble, I think, can be really problematic, and just lead to, like, I feel that way is sort of like, this, like, science Twitter is amazing, but I feel like it's really within, like, it's scientists talking to other scientists and SciComm people talking to scientists and other SciComm people. So I think that's something to really watch out for, is just not to get trapped into talking to ourselves. And then the other aspect, I think, is that that, like, so many scientists, they feel obliged to have to be SciComm, like, to make really, like, have a large component that's dedicated to, like, SciComm. And I think that can be clearly awesome, but also, it's a lot of burden to put on individual scientists when they're trying to do their science. So, if it doesn't end up being fun for you, or if it doesn't end up funding you, and I think that there's a real conflict around some of this stuff where people are like, well, this is my time and I should be paid for it. And I think that's totally right on when it's, universities or other people that are taking advantage of, or not taking advantage, but they're asking scientists, and they're asking maybe Black scientists or Black women scientists, who are the few, scientists who can tell their journey as a Black woman scientist. And then they often have to, like, take their time away from doing science to tell those stories. I feel that, yeah. So so I don't know. I mean, I think that there's an aspect where it's like this saturation of people asking, like, the same things over and over again. It's almost like you need, like, an ORCID, or I don't even know how to say that, ORCID, for your life story as a scientist, so that you can just be like, yes, this is how I got into science. These are the people that I look up to, those sorts of things, because I think there's so many people that want that information, and it can be really taxing on scientists to have to give it all the time to the next new thing, if you know what I mean.
Yeah. No, I get you, Justin. Thank you so much. Can you believe we've gone over 30? Shocked. I'm not shocked, actually. I'm not surprised at all. But this was such a great chat. It was nice meeting the brains and the face behind CodeMakers, SuperScientists, because we've been seeing all these SuperScientists. So it's nice to know, where the idea came from, why the idea started. So thank you so much for taking time out of the evening to come through and just talk to us about it. It was great. I learned so much.
Thanks a lot. I appreciate it.
Yeah, and keep doing the good work, Justin. We see it, and we're very proud of you. And yeah, we love seeing the super scientists, and we can't wait to see more.
Cool. We will have a lot more and new stuff.
Thank you, everybody, for watching. Thank you, everybody, for watching. And yeah, Justin, that's it. Have a good evening.
Thanks, you too.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye-bye.